When it comes to mental health in entertainment and in the sports industries, I think we're having the wrong conversation. I've been a mental wellness and mental performance coach for the last 10 plus years, and I've witnessed a lot of different things. I've learned a lot of things, and I've helped a lot of people. But what I've noticed over the years is that we're having the wrong conversation when it comes to mental health. I have a question for you. When I say the words mental health, what comes to mind? Typically, people will think of things like anxiety, depression, stress, something along those lines. Now, when I say physical health, what are the first few things that come to your mind then? Most of the time, people will think of things like exercise, eating healthy, going out for a walk, the gym, something along those lines. Now, if you're following me here, something doesn't seem right. I said mental health, and then I said physical health. But when I said mental health, when people think of those things that I mentioned, anxiety, depression, stress, etc., they're actually not thinking of mental health. Now, here's what I mean when I say that we're having the wrong conversation. When people think of mental health and they think of a lack of health, which is anxiety and depression and all the other things that come to mind, that's where the conversation around mental well-being starts, is anxiety, depression, stress. And we usually have that conversation when someone is already in a state where they feel like they're struggling. But when we talk about physical health, we go out and we go to the gym or we go for a walk. We get some sunlight. I think we should have the same exact approach to our mental well-being that we try to have, or that most of us have, for our physical well-being. Once upon a time, when I first became, well, I'll say obsessed with health, it was all about physical health. I was a junior in high school, and I learned about this concept of epigenetics. I watched a documentary, and it essentially taught me that we might have certain genes. We might be born with certain genes in our DNA, and we can't really do much about those genetics. But we can influence whether or not certain genetic SNPs, certain genes get turned on or off. Now, this blew my mind when I learned that, because growing up, I had a ton of people in my family get diagnosed with different forms of cancer, with diabetes, with heart disease, with high blood pressure, all kinds of different physical ailments. I saw people getting older, and as they got older, they got more immobile. They got less active. They got less healthy. They just started to decline. And this was sort of just the norm. This is what we were taught, that when you get older, things just happen. You just start to decline. Your health starts to decline. And in this documentary, I basically learned that actually there's a lot of things that we could do to expand and extend our health span. Now, this is not a new concept today, but at the time, which was like in 2010 or so, it was groundbreaking. And so because I had all these different diseases and all kinds of things that I felt like were stacked against me when it came to my physical health genetically, I was determined from that point forward, when I learned it, that I would do everything I possibly could to help prevent these sort of illnesses and diseases in my own body. And I would do everything that I possibly could to not only prevent them, but to optimize my well-being, to make myself as healthy as I possibly could. Now, I know stuff happens and we can't control everything, but there's so much that we can at least influence, and there's so much that we actually can do, that the idea of outsourcing my health just became obsolete. It was like, from that point forward, that was never going to happen. And so I had this deep, deep passion for well-being and for health and for learning. And it wasn't until my second semester of my freshman year in college that I learned that we could do the same thing for the mind. And when I learned that, again, it blew my mind because, again, I just thought stuff happened. People either had depression or they didn't. People either had anxiety or they didn't. People either experienced severe psychiatric issues or they didn't. And it was just kind of a matter of time. Just like what I thought previously when it came to cancer or other diseases, it was just a matter of time. But that's not true. It's really not true. There's so much we can do to not only extend our physical health span, but our mental health span. Not only extend, but to optimize our mental health span and our mental well-being as well. So when I say that we're having the wrong conversation about mental health, what I mean is we're waiting too long. We're getting to the point where mental health is something that most people are talking about now, which honestly I'm so grateful for, because when I first started this about 10 years ago, the idea of taking care of your mind was like, it didn't make sense to people. Or it made sense, but they didn't really get it. The conversation just wasn't even happening. So I'm glad that we're even having a conversation right now, even though I think it might be slightly not the right conversation or the best conversation, but at least we're having the conversation, which is great. But again, we're waiting until a crisis happens. We're waiting until somebody starts to feel severely anxious or severely depressed, or at the point where they can no longer perform their daily tasks or their work. They can't show up. They can't go on tour. They can't play their game. They can't show up for the meetings. This is not mental health. This is a lack of health. And maybe it's important that I first define what even is health and what is illness. So I think in today's day and age, we tend to think that health is just the absence of illness. If somebody's not ill, then they're healthy. And there's a little bit more to it. Just because someone doesn't have a diagnosed illness doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthy. In my view, health is not just the absence of illness. Health is vitality, it's energy, it's agility, mentally and physically. It's mobility, it's flexibility, mentally and physically. It's joy. It's a sense of ease. It's a sense of peace, mentally and physically. And when we talk about illness, or when I talk about illness, what we're talking about is a state where the mind and or the body are not at ease. It's a state of dis-ease, where the mind and or the body are lacking something or has too much of something. That's illness. That's the lack of health. So I'm not saying that if somebody is not 1,000% extremely, extremely healthy, that they're ill. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I am saying that health is not just the absence of illness. There's so much more to it, and there are levels to it. There are levels and layers, and we can always be growing and always be pursuing excellence in our health, mentally, physically, and emotionally. Now, I looked up some statistics, and the National Alliance for Mental Illness shows that 19.1% of the population in the United States has been diagnosed with a mental illness. 1 out of 5 US adults experiences mental illness. Now, this is clinically diagnosed based off of the DSM-5, which that's a conversation for a different time. But 1 out of 5 people, according to this statistic and according to the survey, experience mental illness in the United States. Now, we just talked about what is health, what is illness. Those are stats for mental illness. When it comes to mental health, in a 2023 poll done by Gallup, it showed that 31% of Americans would define their mental health as being excellent. 31. Okay, so if only 19.1% of the population has a diagnosed mental illness, how is it that 31%, only 31% of the United States can claim that their mental health is in excellent shape or excellent form? This is what I mean when I say that health is not just the absence of illness. In our country, we tend to not be very proactive with really any form of our health. We are a little bit more proactive with our physical health, but when it comes to health in general, as Americans in general, and again, I'm generalizing here, we tend to be very reactive. How many people do you know don't take care of themselves physically, and they go to the doctor and they get their labs read, or they get a diagnosis, or the doctor tells them, hey, I know you need this knee replacement, or I know you need this surgery, but you really can't do it yet because your heart is so unhealthy. You need to lose X amount of pounds, or we need to get your blood pressure down because we can't do the surgery when your blood pressure's through the roof. Or their doctor tells them, you're on the verge of diabetes. Something's got to change. There's got to be a lifestyle modification. Well, actually, nowadays they just prescribe injections. But anyway, and that can help a lot of people. So I'm not discounting that. But back to my point. My point is just that how many people wait until they have or experience a crisis or they have a diagnosis, and then they do something about their physical health. Then they go, okay, I'm going to eat a little bit differently now. I'm going to start walking. I'm going to start taking care of my physical body now. Well, the same goes for the mental side of things. We tend to wait. And then when we experience something overwhelming or a serious crisis where we just cannot do it alone, then we go out and we seek therapy, or we go to rehab, or whatever it might be. We take a break from the thing that we do. We take a break from our career because it's become too much and we don't know what to do with it. And I'm not knocking anybody who's experienced this. And I want to say right now that my heart breaks for anybody that has experienced that. It's so hard. It's so hard. Whether it's physical or it's mental, my heart breaks for anybody who's experienced that. And I also would like to say, on the other hand, that there's so much that we can do to try to prevent those things from happening, to fortify our minds and our bodies, but we're talking about mental health here, to fortify our minds, to strengthen them, to make them more flexible, more agile, to bring more peace and more joy into our lives, into our minds, so that when things happen, when a serious crisis happens, it doesn't bring us down as far as it would had we not built up those tools and those sort of mental muscles. So how do we take a proactive approach to our mental health and not just wait for a crisis? So here's a quick little story. A few years ago, I wanted to start training for a triathlon. And so I wanted to just get in shape and start running a little bit just so that I could prime my body to start training. And I went for a couple of runs, and for some reason, my knee was hurting really badly. Now, I've been an athlete my whole life, and I've never had any serious injury other than an elbow injury from snowboarding. So having knee pain when I was running, and it was at the very beginning, was concerning to me. So, of course, I did what any novice who doesn't know much about the kinetic chain would do. I thought maybe it's my shoes. So I'll go get new shoes. So I went to go get new shoes. Same thing happened. I thought, okay, well, maybe I tweaked something and just didn't know it. And so I'll take a couple days off. So I took a couple days off. And then I got back to it. And then the same thing happened again. And at that point, I knew, because I'm such a stickler for proactive health and proactive well-being, I thought, okay, no way am I going to let this turn into a serious injury sometime down the line by continuing running and just pushing through the pain. Nor am I going to not run just because I have pain. That doesn't make sense to me. That I knew enough to know just taking time off wasn't going to heal anything. Something needed to happen. I experienced some serious discomfort and pain, which told me something needs to be strengthened, something needs to be tweaked, something needs to be adjusted, but something's not quite right. Now, it wasn't a full-blown injury, like I said, thank God. I didn't have to have surgery. I didn't have to be in crutches. It was nothing like that, but there was discomfort, and it was enough discomfort to signal to my mind and my brain that something is not optimal. Something is not quite right. So I went to physical therapy. And when I was at physical therapy, they assessed my entire body up and down the kinetic chain. They looked at mobility in my ankles and my hips and my knees and my back and my spine. They looked at everything. And what they found was my knee was not the source of my knee pain, which was a little bit surprising to me. And what they explained to me was that I had weak glute medius muscles. And because of a weak glute med, it was causing my knee to go in when I would run. So if you think about your body and you think about your glute muscles, they have to be strong in order to keep you steady and stable on one leg. When you're running one leg to the other, you're basically just hopping back and forth from one leg to the other. If something is weak, it's going to fall in. So if you run and your knee is supposed to look like this, mine was essentially doing that because of a weak glute muscle way up here. So the weak glute was causing the knee to go in when I would run, and it wasn't stable enough. And because of that, it was causing some pain in the Achilles tendon, and then all of that was happening. And on top of that, I was experiencing pain in my hamstring, and that was caused by tight hips and a pinched nerve in my lower back. Now, how did I get here when all I wanted to do was run and complete a triathlon? Well, it happened because I wasn't strengthening my muscles properly. I wasn't working my muscle groups properly in the gym. I basically was not doing good and proper strength training. After several weeks in physical therapy, I got to the point where I could run again. My ankles and my hips were more mobile. My spine was more mobile. My core, my glutes, and my legs were much stronger, providing a very strong foundation for me to be able to run without any pain. And not only was I running without pain, but I had to learn how to run properly. Now, again, I've been an athlete my whole life, and nobody had ever talked to me about running properly. I didn't even know that was a thing. But apparently, the way that I was running could cause more injuries in the future. Now, I tell you this story because, again, I had some knee pain, and that's all it was. And I knew enough to know that something needed to change. I just didn't know what. And a lot of us in our lives will experience things like certain cycles or certain habits that we find ourselves in. And they might be a little uncomfortable. They might just signal to us like, hey, this is not working the way that I thought it would, or the way that I want it to, or the way that I think it should, something is just not quite right. And it could be something as simple as every time you drive, and if somebody cuts you off, you just go irate. You get super angry. Or maybe it makes you super anxious, but then you're fine and whatever, then you keep driving. But that cycle, in that trigger of the person cutting you off in traffic, is signaling something to your brain and to your body that maybe could be tweaked, that maybe could signal to you that if something was strengthened or stretched or mobilized, that response might subside or go away completely. Or it could be something even more severe, like an addiction or stage fright or performance anxiety, anything along those lines. These are all just signals in the exact same way that knee pain when I would run was a signal. And it doesn't mean you have an anxiety disorder, and it doesn't mean you are depressed. What it means is there's some digging to do. What it means is there's some work to do. And that's when we want to be proactive with our well-being, and maybe even before that. So what I could do moving forward, and what I have been doing ever since I learned what I learned in physical therapy, is strengthening my muscles, making sure that I'm mobile, making sure that I'm flexible, making sure that I'm not only just strengthening, but I'm lengthening. And I'm working all the different muscle groups in various different ways, making sure that I'm strong enough so that if I wanted to run today or tomorrow, I could without any injuries. And not only that, I exercise to make sure that when I'm 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, that I can sit down and stand up out of a chair and not need a walker and not go, ooh, yeah, that's what happens when you get old, because it's not. It's just not. I have seen people in their 80s and 90s who walk just fine, who sit down and stand up out of a chair just fine, who don't need any assistance in their daily activities and daily lives. And I've seen people in their 70s and 80s who struggle to move and to walk and to get out of a chair and to sit down and to just be functional. And I look at those people's lives and what they did prior to their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And they had two very different backgrounds, two very different healthcare and self-care routines. And that set them up for what they started to experience in their later years. So what I'm saying now is that we can approach the mind the exact same way that we approach the body. We can be proactive so that when we experience some kind of storm in our lives, and it's really not a matter of if, it really is a matter of when, because life just happens and things happen. It's just how it goes. But when that storm hits, if we have the proper tools that we need, picture a rainstorm. If you experience a rainstorm, you could go out into the rain and try to run to your destination and get soaked, and then figure out how am I going to dry off and get new clothes. You basically have to go backwards in order to move forward. But if you go out into the rain and you've got rain boots, you've got your umbrella, you got your jacket, then you're going to be just fine when you get to your destination, and you might just walk and smile in the rain. That's what we want to do when it comes to our well-being and our mental health specifically. We want to fill our toolbox with the umbrella, the rain jacket, the rain boots, maybe even the rain hat, all the tools that we might possibly need, so that when that rainstorm comes, we can go out into the rain and be just fine. And yeah, maybe we get like a little bit damp, but we're not soaked. And we're not struggling to figure out how we're going to get dry and be able to move forward. We just remove the rain boots and kick them off and let them dry. And we put the umbrella down and shake it out and let it dry. So if you're wondering, okay, well, where do I start? I get these concepts, I get it, but where do I start? I think the first place to start is just to recognize where certain things could be better. Everything in your life might be good. And I love that. I really do. I love that for you. What could be great? What could be even better? That's where we start. Or if you experience something, maybe it's one of those habits or those cycles, or there's a trigger, or it's a place where you could increase in your confidence, or anything, something you struggle with, stress, whatever it is. And you go, that's kind of like my knee pain. This thing is like Stephanie's knee pain, where it's really not that bad. It's not a full-blown injury where I need surgery or crutches, but it's uncomfortable enough to where I know that something could be tweaked. So that's where I'm going to start. And if you're wondering, well, what does a mentally healthy person even look like, or sound like, or act like, or what are characteristics of a mentally healthy person? I'm going to give you 7 characteristics of a mentally healthy person. Number 1, a mentally healthy person tends to have exercise built into their daily or weekly routine. Regular physical activity is associated with a 26% lower risk of depression. Physical activity, especially if it's outside, is one of the greatest mental health hacks ever, and it can be free. So mentally healthy people, they exercise. Number 2, mentally healthy people tend to have fewer deficiencies and a lower toxic load. Here's what I mean. Every single vitamin, mineral, nutrient in our bodies not only affects our physical body and whether or not we get sick, but it also affects the brain. Our brain and our bodies are one. It's all connected. At least I think. This is connected to this. There's no separation. So people who are mentally healthy tend to have fewer deficiencies. Things like vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA, magnesium, B vitamins, methylated folate, or methylated B12 as well. These vitamins and these minerals and nutrients have been shown to significantly lower rates of things like depression and anxiety. And people with optimal levels of these nutrients tend to have not only a healthier body, but a healthier brain. And a healthier brain leads to a healthier mind. Now, when it comes to toxic load, things like heavy metals, mycotoxins, chemicals, all kinds of different toxins that are in the environment, in the air, in our water, these things can be toxic to the brain. They're called neurotoxins. And a toxic brain, whether it's something that's purposely being ingested, like certain drugs or alcohol, or it's accidentally just through air, water, food, these things can all affect the brain. And if we have a toxic brain, it's going to be a lot harder to have a healthy mind. As you can see here, some symptoms of a toxic brain are things like brain fog, depression, anxiety, learning problems, could be autism spectrum disorder, temper outbursts, psychotic behavior, memory problems, dementia, all kinds of different things. Again, these toxins not only affect our physical body, but they can affect the brain too. So people who are mentally healthy tend to have fewer deficiencies and a lower toxic load. The third characteristic of mentally healthy people is that they tend to use healthy coping mechanisms. Now, this seems obvious, but people who use adaptive coping mechanisms like problem solving, emotional regulation, things like prayer, going out for a walk, all of those things make them 2 times more likely to report a higher mental well-being. It's so easy for us to come up with our own coping mechanisms that are just not that healthy, even though they might not be something severe like a serious drug addiction. There are other coping mechanisms that your everyday person just might pick up to try and, again, cope with whatever it is that they're doing. And everybody has coping mechanisms. But mentally healthy people tend to use, well, the healthier coping mechanisms. The fourth characteristic of mentally healthy people is that they have strong relationships. Think about the people in your life who are the happiest. Think about the people who have the greatest friendships and relationships. Think about the people who have the most joy and the most peace of mind. They probably have really strong relationships. There's study after study after study, data after data after data that show the importance of having really strong, healthy relationships, and how this not only affects obviously our mental well-being, but our physical too. And pretty much every single one that I've mentioned already not only affects our mental well-being, but the physical as well. Because again, it's all interconnected. It's all one. We just cannot separate the two. They are one. And by having strong relationships, it reduces premature death by 50% and reduces loneliness and the risk of depression by 40%. That is huge. If there's one thing you do to reduce your risk of loneliness and depression and premature death, and that thing is having strong relationships, go wild. Go wild. It's free. You just have some great people around you. Just build relationships and invest your time and energy in healthy, wonderful people. What a gift. What a gift it is to have healthy, strong relationships. The fifth characteristic of mentally healthy people is that they tend to have a strong spiritual or religious practice. Now, I've got some suspicion as to why that is. And one of those is that when we don't have that, we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do everything, be everything, and everything rides on us. Everything depends on us. And we will let ourselves down all the time. All the time. Maybe I should speak for myself. I let myself down all the time. But I don't put my faith and my hope and my trust all in myself. Because if I did, I would be laid out on the ground most of the time. Because I will just let myself down over and over and over again. So people who tend to have a strong religious and or spiritual practice tend to increase their chances of being mentally healthy. And in fact, in this study here, published in the World Journal of Clinical Cases, they studied spirituality and religiousness and the connection there to mental health. And what they found was that higher levels of spirituality and religiosity were generally associated with lower depressive symptoms. They also found that it was associated with lower suicidality, lower substance abuse, and greater mental health overall. Now, of course, there are plenty of examples of people who have a strong spiritual or religious practice and who experience anxiety and depression and psychiatric breaks and all kinds of different things, because we're human at the end of the day. We're human. But again, what we're doing and what we're talking about here is increasing our chances of living a mentally healthy life, of optimizing and extending our mental health span. And like I said in the very beginning, we just want to influence whatever we can. We can't control everything. But again, mentally healthy people tend to have a strong spiritual or religious practice. The sixth characteristic of mentally healthy people is that they tend to stay present focused. They don't think too far in advance in the future, and they don't think too far behind in the past. They don't think too far behind in the past. They stay somewhere in the middle, having an eye on the future and where they want to go, and maybe having an eye on the past, looking back every once in a while just to see how far they've come, or perhaps to look back and learn from things that happened in the past so that they can take them forward into the future. These people tend to practice mindfulness. Have you ever been super anxious because you're thinking about the future, or felt kind of depressed because you're thinking about the past? When we focus on the present, it's a lot easier for us to be at ease. When we're focusing too far in the future, or too far in the past, or too deep into the future, or too deep into the past, it opens up the doors to anxiety and depression, stress, overwhelm, you name it. So staying present as much as we can, and there's no such thing as staying present all the time. That's just not human. But staying present and staying mindful can be extremely helpful. So mentally healthy people tend to stay present focused. The last and certainly not least characteristic of mentally healthy people is that they are less attached to their outcomes and external validation. I heard Gary Vee say once upon a time,
"So when I hear nice things, I don't get high, but that's a very good thing, because when people say the reverse in my comments or negative things, I don't get low." When you become detached from either positive or negative comments, you win. The reason so many of you struggle is you like the compliments, but now you get used to the feedback. So then when somebody says you're shit, you believe that too. I don't believe either. I hear nothing. It's super quiet up here.
This one is one that I see a lot in the industries that I work in entertainment, in sports, and in music. It's so easy for us to define ourselves by our successes and by our failures. And really in any industry, in any walk of life, it's easy for us to do that. But to stay mentally healthy, it's important that we create a little bit of separation there so that when we fail or we fall, we don't tell ourselves or believe that we are a failure. And when we succeed and we rise, we don't believe that that's who we are either, because we can't have one without the other. We can't define ourselves by our failures without defining ourselves by our successes, and we can't define ourselves by our successes without defining ourselves by our failures. We are who we are, and if we fail, we fail, and if we succeed, we succeed, and that's a temporary thing. Both of those are temporary. Success, in whatever form it comes, whether it's a Grammy or it's a home run or it's scoring 4 goals in a World Cup, or it's losing the World Cup and it's striking out and it's not getting signed to a record deal and it's not getting a role, whatever it is, those things are temporary. But who we are, that is not. So mentally healthy people tend to detach from external validation and outcomes that they experience. I hope this was helpful for you, and this is just the beginning. In the next few videos, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into nearly every single one of those characteristics of mentally healthy people so that we can expand and learn a little bit more about how to optimize our mental well-being so that when we say mental health, what we're talking about is actual health. If you like this video and you want to learn more about how to pursue excellence in your life, or you want to learn from other people and how they pursue excellence, go ahead and click the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and when we put out new videos, you'll be the first to know. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
This content is for educational purposes only and is not intended to be medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your health or lifestyle. Neither the host, guest, nor this company are liable for any outcomes from the use of this information. Guests share their own opinions, which do not necessarily reflect those of the host or the company.